platforms. Clearly, we have to talk about the distribution platforms in gaming themselves, like Steam, Xbox, Amazon. I think we'd be remiss if we don't mention Twitch, which I'm sure everyone watching this is aware of, but Twitch is a live streaming platform, and basically they broadcast the majority, I would say, of esports tournaments along with YouTube and a couple others out there, but those would be more on the gaming side. You can very well cover all the gambling platforms.
Catherine, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So I think at the collegiate level, we'll see a synergistic approach to what the players are bringing in terms of their expectations for the games they want to play at high school and college levels. But also, I think the games that the colleges are focusing on and where the scholarships are and where the varsity teams are also going to have an impact. So I think some of the providers related to collegiate esports, TESPA, which organizes national competitions for Overwatch and other games, Collegiate Star League, the National Association of Collegiate Esports, and of course, game publishers like Riot Games organize their own collegiate league for, say, League of Legends. So I think we'll continue to see sort of a symbiotic relationship there between the players and what they want to see at the collegiate level.
Thank you. With regard to our next question, during the COVID-19 pandemic, esports benefited when traditional sports were shut down. In the legalized gambling sector, esports became one of the most prominent wagering activities. Jurisdictions that may have had some reservations about allowing wagering on esports began to embrace it. So in the past year, since traditional sports have resumed and returned to their regular season, is there still a demand for esports wagering products? Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. we see that in our revenue. So since COVID, the esports space has been growing tremendously and it became a really important part of our business. And we see that both in Australia and in the US. And something I would like to add is if coming back to the regulations of the US, so we would like to offer it in every market that we go into. We have secured significant market access and are about to launch many markets in the next couple of months and years. And sometimes the states don't allow esports betting. So as I said earlier, 12 states at the moment don't allow that. And the problem with that is if you don't allow esports betting to happen, people that want to bet, they find the offshore operators where you have no consumer protection, where you have no state revenue. So kind of like prohibiting esports betting doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense because of many aspects. And it's much better to allow esports betting, and then basically if there are concerns with young audiences, oftentimes the argument that people are making is esports has such a young audience, so we have to ban it. But banning it doesn't help at all. So it's better to allow esports betting and then control it and make sure that nobody that's underage bets on it. And that's basically what I would hope for that happens in the US. Oftentimes, regulators really don't understand the space, and I think that's kind of like a little bit the problem with getting it regulated. We see the same with crypto. So also the crypto space, explain to a regulator how that works. It's sometimes difficult, and we saw that when PASPA was repealed over like three and a half years ago. Many regulators were from one day to the other in charge of regulating a sports betting market that they didn't even know how you do betting. And it's a challenge that they're facing, and not something like arrogant or anything like that, but it's kind of like a knowledge gap that we have to close. So I think there's a lot of education work that's needed on the side of the regulators to understand how things like crypto work, how things like esports betting work, and only if they understand the space, they can come up with a regulation that makes sense, and that helps legalizing the market overall. But again, kind of like prohibiting esports betting pushes that all into the underground, into the offshore market, and that's not good for the industry.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. I think we saw pretty similar trends during the pandemic and after the pandemic. When I think about the esports betting customer, I like to think of it in two separate buckets. So the first bucket is a traditional sports bettor that will occasionally bet on esports, kind of looking at it as like a line extension, like Dr. Mintas mentioned, it's just another sport. Those people really came in during the pandemic, and they were betting on like simulations of traditional sports, so Madden, FIFA. A lot of those people, they're not betting on esports as much as they were when there was nothing else to bet on. That's the old, degenerate just wants to bet on something, and this is the only game in town. But what we have seen, I think the bigger opportunity for esports focused bettors, and even for the larger traditional operators, is the customers that are esports first bettors that are betting on the Counter-Strikes, the Valorants, the League of Legends games of the world. Those people are not necessarily passion, it's their a lifestyle for them. And I think that's the big opportunity to kind of capture that bucket, rather than just looking at it as a line extension, which I think some of the big operators at this point are doing. So those are the people that really came accelerated during the pandemic and have even grown even more so post the pandemic. Would you mind if I add something?
Oh, no, please, you're welcome to.
I'd just like to add something that Dr. Mintis mentioned. Prohibition has never worked. It's never worked in the past. It's not going to work in the present. People are going to do what they want to do. So it doesn't make any sense for regulators to push this away and ignore it. They need to embrace it. And it's difficult for them because they're, typically in the regulatory world, they're used to people making a software submission that they can go through and doing, various steps with the software, making sure security protocols, no backdoors. Video games are famous for having backdoors and codes and things where you can cheat on the games and so on and so forth. So I think there is a bit of an education process. Absolutely, I think that's one of the most important things for a regulatory aspect is to educate them so they understand the product and understand what they're doing. And those regulators that have taken the time to understand it have possibly move forward with that. And one last thing, going back to the earlier comment about Twitch, one of the things that we did, and I'm sure others have as well, is we integrated a Twitch feed right into our betting screen. So you've got Twitch right there. You can be watching the feeds while you're betting on the games. So that kind of brought the two together. So you're not second screening, you're watching Twitch directly on your screen while you've got your betting screen right there as well. So it kind of made things a little more user-friendly. So just those thoughts. Twitch is bringing a lot of eyeballs on this.
Thanks. Catherine, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So I think that we're talking about two sides of the same coin, right? So the more customers that we have, the more people betting, the more that we have a pipeline that reaches down into K-12, that's a market base for a long time to come. But it also creates some regulatory issues. The United States right now is in the middle of a new wave of legalized gaming with the spread of sports betting. And we already know that some of the states that were early out in legalizing sports betting after PASPA was struck down are already considering whether their laws were too limiting in terms of being competitive in the market. And the two key places that we are seeing the more recent state laws address that are by authorizing mobile wagering and by expanding sports betting to include events, to include esports and other things. So those two things go hand in hand. It's a market opportunity, but it also creates some regulatory issues.
So I'm going to take a little moderator prerogative as a former regulator. Well, you were heard. Understand your concerns about regulators. Not all regulators are not educated, and not all regulators are afraid about dealing with new issues. So I wholeheartedly agree on education and more education. Next question. And Catherine, we're going to have you kick this off for us. As wagering on esports becomes more mainstream in anything being done within the esports community, where does the responsibility lie to educate athletes, teams, owners, and fans about responsible gambling and problem gambling?
Sure. So thinking about the gambling aspect, there was a recent study out of the UK that looked at illegal bets, underage bets that were placed by kids that were 16 and younger. And something like 25% of the bets that are placed on esports are placed by underage young teens. They were also much less likely, those underage teens, to place bets on traditional sports. 5 times more likely to place those illegal bets on esports. So, again, 2 sides of the coin. On the one hand, once they get to legal age, there are your legal customers. On the other hand, that's a real regulatory issue. So coming back to the esports coming into K through 12 and in the collegiate arena, I think that is a real opportunity for schools at the same time that they are encouraging kids to be interested in esports, and hope that that also means that they're interested in science, technology, engineering, math, design, and so forth. I think that that's an opportunity for schools to incorporate responsible gambling and problem gambling, because we should not shy away from the reality that kids who are playing esports are also likely to be gambling on esports.
All right, anybody else from the panel want to chime in?
Well, we can talk about just in addition to what Catherine was stating. Yes, obviously kids have been doing this, and it's something that has to be addressed. Skin gaming was how it is with loot boxes and various things along those lines have caused issues and problems, and it's very easy for kids to be able to find their way to doing these things. So, I can understand the need for regulation, but as you mentioned, kids start early and they start playing these games early, and it doesn't take long for them to figure this out. So that's why, I'm a firm believer in regulation and trying to keep this in order and make sure that everything is sanctioned properly. But also, going back to your other comment, is that, we do start with a much younger age. And with that, also comes a lot of responsibility that comes with it from an operator's perspective and from the people that are actually offering the games to the public.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a very high responsibility, and I think the study that was quoted was done in the UK. Everybody knows the UK has big problems with gambling, addiction in general. I think also the society has changed so much. I have a 5-year-old daughter. She just started with kindergarten. She has her own laptop. She's sitting in front of the laptop the whole day. I mean, when we grew up, I think I had my first laptop when I was like a teenager. So I think the kids nowadays, they start much earlier with technology, and the internet, etc., provides a lot of different dangers, right? Risks nowadays. Gambling is just one of them. So I think it comes down to broader kind of like conversation about technology and internet and accessibility for that by young kids in general. So gambling is just one of those problems that come with that, and that we have obviously to be aware of. And I think it's very important that operators make sure that they have all the KYC regulations in place and stick to the regulation, make sure they control as good as possible that nobody that's underage can play. And that's the same for people that are addicted, kind of like make sure that they're not having access to the operation and place bets, etc. So it's a general problem that we have to kind of like be aware of and make sure we stick to the regulation, make sure that that's not happening.
I agree. Everyone's kind of said it. It's been a theme so far today. I mean, regulate, bring it into the light, and make sure that underage kids aren't able to get in. I imagine the 25%, we're probably mostly all doing it on illegal websites, because if you're regulated, you have procedures in place so that if you do allow underage betting, you lose your license. So you you wouldn't risk that. So, yeah.
So I found this discussion fascinating. It's one of the areas that I'm currently looking into, and we've heard a lot about regulations and regulators and maybe what some operators can do. But we've not heard one word about what parents could or should do, right? Because as parents, I think most people don't hesitate to talk to their kids about drugs and about the dangers of alcohol and sex. Do you think we're going to get to a point where gambling is going to be such an accepted or tolerated or whatever adjective you want to put activity in society that it's no longer going to be quite as taboo, that parents will get to a place where they start having regular conversations about some of the challenges affiliated with gambling with their children? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to date myself here because I didn't have a laptop when I grew up, so there's no such thing. Okay, so I'm a father of 5. They're all grown up now, and I have a sophomore that's my youngest that's in college, and a grandfather. So having gone through the paces with 5 kids, I can tell you that parents play a heavy role in watching what your kids do, because this is the issue right here, right? Everybody's got one of these, right? Even your children have them, because parents want to be able to track their children or be able to make sure they can get in contact with you. And I can see over the years the screen addiction. I mean, everybody's staring at the screens. There was a point I came home at one point to have a family conversation, just to talk to my kids, and everybody had their phones. I actually took a photo of this. They all had their faces buried in their phones, and they were all playing games. And yeah, there comes a certain point in time where the parent does have a responsibility to say that. Will it ever become like acceptable to gamble and let your kids gamble and be irresponsible with their money? No, I hope that doesn't happen in our society. I think it should be controlled, and it's also something that parents need to control their children as well. Just my thoughts.
Just wanted to throw that out there. I thought that's kind of interesting that, there may be one more societal challenge that parents might have to start considering, and I haven't seen anything in any problem gambling or responsible gambling materials that help encourage parents to have conversations with their kids. So I wanted to just get your take on it. All right, let's move on to our next pathway for conversation. This is one I think, Layla, is right up your alley, and I find this fascinating as well. In some respects, it's my personal opinion that esports have paved the way for traditional sports athletes in terms of how to create commercial relationships generally, and with media companies, more specifically exploiting their name, image, and likeness, and the ways in which the connections with the fans are made. So in the legal sports wagering ecosystem, deals are being made that only a year ago seemed completely unimaginable. It's moving very quickly in that traditional sports betting space. How will esports continue to be innovative and create new pathways and avenues for engagement?
Yeah, good question. And I think what's happening at the moment is that the whole esports space is accelerating. And looking at that with my sports betting eyes, I sometimes cannot believe how fast the movement goes. So, for example, Call of Duties and Overwatch League, they just permitted betting sponsorships, which is something that's totally new, especially in the US. Speaking to the leagues, they're just getting started on allowing sponsorships on jerseys, etc. There's still a lot of restrictions, so basically the esports space kind of like outperformed almost the traditional sport here, and it's pretty interesting. It's a great new environment to kind of like get sponsorship money into esports. It hopefully helps and also structuring certain things in a better way. So I think overall it's great for the athletes. Looking at that from an integrity perspective, and integrity is always mentioned as one point that speaks against esports. It's always like, okay, there's all this cheating going on, etc. And I run FIFA's integrity efforts for a few years, long time ago, and I can tell you traditional sports has a lot of problem when it comes to integrity, and we had even cases that's public information, so I'm not telling like secrets here. We had even manipulative cases on World Cup qualifier games. So that goes up to like the highest games and FIFA that you can think of. Of course, you have manipulations potentially going on in esports as well, but I don't see that as a much higher risk than in traditional sports. And I think it's a great opportunity for athletes to now get more into the sports betting space. At the same time, again, there needs to be an education, that they know where the limits are, where things can get like a little bit in a gray area. So to make sure that they benefit from those movements and developments and not getting like hurt at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, the name and likeness stuff is, I think, really fascinating. And I was a college athlete, lacrosse player, so wasn't much money in lacrosse anyway, but it would have been pretty cool to have a name and likeness deal. It really does feel like this is an area where esports was light years ahead because there really is no NCAA for esports. Esports athletes have been streaming on Twitch and been getting advertisements. You see all the time. A YouTube influencer makes $10 million, like opening, some 3-year-old opening gifts on YouTube can make money. I know that's not necessarily NCAA related, but the celebrity and people using their influence has been a theme in kind of gaming and streaming for a long time, and it feels like traditional sports is kind of just catching up, which I think is great for all the student athletes out there that have kind of not been able to be paid for a long time. I also think it's interesting now to see some of these athletes in different sports using gaming to engage their fans. Like a lot of pro athletes, Austin Eckler on the Chargers, Chad Ochocinco is obviously retired, but using streaming to kind of elongate their celebrity, elongate their fame, and also just monetize their brand and their fans after they retire or while they're still playing. I think it's pretty cool that gaming gives them the opportunity to do that.
Catherine, did you want to weigh in?
No, I think that covers it well.
All right, we have just about 5 minutes left. I have tons more remaining questions that I'd love to get to, but we're just not. I thought I'd open it up for questions, and if nobody has any questions, we'll ask one final question of all the panelists. So audience, any questions you want to ask? Riveted as you are, so that you all have questions on the tips of your tongues, but you want to really hear the answer to this final question I'm going to ask the panelists, right? Get head nods. So we're going to go ahead and go with this. Catherine, you've been a good sport. You've been last to answer, so we're going to throw it to you first. So it's interesting. In a recent survey, industry professionals worldwide were asked, what are the most significant threats to the growth of esports as we're moving into the future? I'm going to limit you to 3 bullet point responses so that we can get to all the panelists and end on time.
So I think that one of the most significant threats to the growth of the esports betting market is the failure to address underage gambling, whether that's simply through illegal providers, through the skins market, whatever the case might be. As mobile betting and online gaming spreads even further across the United States, this problem is only going to grow as esports continues to grow, particularly K-12 and at the college level. This problem is only going to grow. So I think the failure to address underage wagering on esports would be a significant threat. And in fact, I'll stop with just that one bullet point.
Perfect. John.
Publisher cooperation, I think, would be very important. I think for the publishers to start cooperating with regulators at some point. I know it's difficult because we would come out with a new version of the game. There's millions and gazillions of lines of code that we have to go through a testing process. By the time we went through a testing process, there'd be a new version. So I think that's publishers working hand in hand. I also echo what Catherine just said, as well as that could be a serious thing if we don't really watch the way the responsibility works in the esports sector. And the third thing I think would be an important thing for us to move the industry forward in the best way is by sanctioning it and organizing it. Again, again, I'll use the MMA example where there's all kinds of MMA fighting, different weights and different styles against each other. And it just made no sense. So to watch the organizations grow, I think will be very helpful.
Let's go with Jeff, and Layla, you'll get the final word.
So you guys took a lot of the easy answer, and I think you guys focus a lot on esports betting. I'll talk a little bit more about esports kind of more broadly, and I'll throw out the inability to make money. I think there's a lot of businesses in esports that a lot of them are burning a lot of money and don't necessarily have proven business models. We all know there's a lot of eyeballs on esports, there's a lot of attention, but monetizing those eyeballs has still been a challenge. A lot of esports teams are burning a ton of money. A lot of esports businesses, tournament operators, again, burning a lot of money, relying on advertising, but the dollars just aren't necessarily big enough to cover the overhead costs. So I think as an industry, and that's one of the things that gets me so excited about betting, because that's a tried and true monetization model. So that's I think going to be important in the future. But if the industry doesn't start figuring out a way to really sustainably make money, that's obviously going to be a problem.
I think all my colleagues make really, really good points. From my perspective, the biggest problem that esports has is its reputation. I think looking through or comparing esports with traditional sport, I don't actually see, and I haven't seen any convincing studies yet, that's my personal opinion, that esports is kind of like attracting more underage gaming necessarily than traditional sport. Also traditional sport, we have youth competitions, we have youth athletes, grassroots, so that all exists in traditional sports as it does in esports, but in normal traditional sports, nobody's discussing underage gaming so much as in esports. Same with integrity, as I mentioned before. In traditional sport, there's no sport across the world that didn't have any issues with integrity, which match manipulation that's related to sports betting. But do we talk about it every day as we do in esports? I don't think so, right? So it's kind of like esports, because it's new, people are kind of like thinking more on esports, but comparing that to traditional sport, I actually think there are many things that speak for esports, and kind of like that there's actually lower risk somehow, because I give you one example. I used to run SportRadar US, so SportRadar is a data company. We send scouts to the venues to collect sports betting data in real time, and then send that to the bookmakers. In esports, you don't have to do that. There's not much need, because it's all digital already. So there's less risk for data to be bad, to be manipulated, because it's in the system already. So it's another advantage that actually esports has over traditional sport. But I think we are always speaking about like, why is esports like more risky, more dangerous, and all of that. But there are also things that basically kind of like make a strong point why esports actually has advantages over traditional sports when it comes to those points.
Thank you. We didn't get to nearly enough of our questions this time, so join us here next year for a wonderful continuation of this riveting conversation. And please join me in thanking this just exceptional panel.
Thanks, Ari. Ari.
Thank you. You did a great job. Yeah, he's a rock star.
Of course. Thanks for having us. We get to see Leo, sir. That's it. Exactly.
Okay, the next panel will be at 3 o'clock. Our speakers are just next speakers will be David Isaacson, Jeff Cohen is back, William Colley, Moritz Moyer, and Bill.
How are you?
Great, lady. How are you?
Yeah.
Visit some family that's off to college and then going
So tomorrow for the tour. I've got everything section team.
Again, you're welcome. I know you got
What time's your thing? What time?
If you want to switch back and forth.
What time is that?
6:30 downtown there.
Okay. That's right. I'm kind of exhausted, but yeah.
I know.
Oh, there you are.
I'm here.
I didn't see
I
you.
don't shirk my commitment.
So are you moderating? You're moderating, right? Okay, thank you. Sorry to put you to work so much work. You know.
Not that much.
Yeah. Well, we're not on for another night.
I see a couple people bad.
Yeah, oh, well, they're not
supposed to be on the second.
yeah. You and Bill William Polly. And then
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. Keep it in there. You don't have a brick?
I know. I was like, oh, I grabbed the cord.
I have an extra brick.
Oh, sweet. There's a chance of fucking up your feed too.
Yeah, well, I've had enough trouble with the audio visual this whole fucking time.
There's a chance it might have an error. It's going to.
Yeah, then I had a major headache with this whole thing. The stress level's beyond. Oh, yeah.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of which?
Oh, hey.
time does this go to, Ari?
This is 45 minutes. So Glenn Platt, professor from University of Miami, and Dave Ryan.
I think it's the bottom, right? Okay. I saw him yesterday.
And Jeff Collins.
Academic. Too much on one side or the other, right?
Oh, you said.
That's all right. I mean, I was on the last panel, so say, but
Even if you're already there, it's not worth saying if it's already said. Even if it all goes over your head, believe it if you want to. So keep your eyes on the road and your head in the stars. Follow it down the rabbit hole just a little while longer. You can change anything if you want to. Sing it like ooh, if you want to. Sing it like ooh, if you want to.
Live. Go ahead, tell you. Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. The panel that I'm going to introduce now is going to deal with esports and video gaming regulations. We have some leading esports executives, political people, university people, and business people to talk about the regulatory environment. To Bill Pasquale, we'll go to the left. I want each of you to introduce yourselves.
Thank you, David. Good to be here with you, Ari. Thanks for having us. I introduced myself earlier on the panel. I'm a partner in Princeton Public Affairs Group. I won't get into all of my bio and background, but I'm really enthusiastic. I've worked a long time with Senator Coley on a host of issues in gaming, both in and outside of his home state of Ohio, and look forward to a robust debate.
And thank you again to Ari and Ben for having us here. It's just good to be at the cutting edge of some really innovative stuff that's affecting our world, not even just our country or region. I'm Bill Coley. I was for 16 years a state legislator, state senator in Ohio. Now I'm a recovering state senator. That's better. Now I'm a recovering state senator, and I have the privilege of working with just a great team of people at the Miami University Institute for Responsible Gaming, Lotteries, and Sport.
Thanks, Bill. My name is Glenn Platt. I'm a professor at Miami University. I'm also the director of our varsity sports program, which was the first Division I school varsity program in the country. And I'm incoming president of the Voice of Intercollegiate Esports at a national organization.
I'm Jeff Cohen. I was on the last panel, so you guys will have to hear my takes again. But Vice President of Strategy and Investor Relations at Esports Entertainment Group. We're a publicly traded esports betting operator.
Great. So the first topic I want to discuss is kind of the regulatory challenges that exist currently around esports. I'd like to give this question to the Bills on this panel, Bill Pasquale and then Bill Coley, to talk a little bit about what are the issues and the constraints around esports regulation, and maybe it's good to be specific about the gambling aspect of esports, since we are in Las Vegas and we're all interested in the betting aspect of this business.
Well, I'll go ahead and start out. Remember, gambling, as we define it in the U.S., is anytime you have consideration, chance, and prizes. And so gambling is, different people have different definitions, but the legal definitions include those three things. As gambling dates back thousands of years, and wherever there's gambling, there's cheating. And the reason gambling was outlawed in so many jurisdictions for so long is because of the inherent problems that occur when people feel cheated and believe that they were cheated. And that leads to violence. And, you know, we all know the Old West scenes of somebody finding somebody with cards up their sleeve and a gunfight ensues. And, you know, well, whether that occurs in the classical sense or in another sense, it's not good for a society. So if you're going to have gaming, you have to make sure that there's a fundamental fairness, that all participants walk away from the table or walk away from the console believing that the contest was ultimately fundamentally fair. You know, it's funny when I talk to people in the esports world, when this first came up, I think Ari and Ben were at a nickel. I used to be president of the National Council of Legislators for Gaming States, and Ari and Ben were at one of our events and early on, and they talked about this, and I really start getting it. You talk to young people and they say, well, yeah, but esports is not gambling. And I said, well, do you pay money? And they said, yeah, and there's a chance whether you win or not. Yeah, well, you know, it's skill a lot. And I said, well, like poker. And they said, yeah, but it's not gambling. And I said, but you can win stuff. Well, you win a skin or you win, you know, some other tokens and things like that. And you can trade these tokens for money, yeah. And then the tokens are like different colors and stuff, yeah. I said, kind of like poker chips. And they said, no, yeah, but it's not gambling. And you know, when you cut it to its core, it is. But it's not viewed by the participants in that respect. And so regulators, as they step into this mode, they have to be careful in this area because you don't want to try to over-regulate and destroy something, because it'll just, as it's been said numerous times today, it'll just progress on the ground and it will be done without your consent and permission. So it's an important step to step in, but it's very challenging for regulators as we move in this world.
Thank you, David. A couple of thoughts. You know, what Bill is talking about is there's tons of case law on what's considered gambling and what isn't. Obviously, Isai Scheinberg, the founder of Peer Software and ultimately the founder of the monster company Poker Stars and a former client of mine, didn't believe poker was anything but a skill game. Thus, you know, he got into his kibitz on Black Friday in 2010. Unfortunately, he just sorted out, after all this time, 11 years, his legal challenges. But I think Isai is an honorable man and did the right thing. And every player for Poker Stars was refunded, unlike some of his competitors that were also slapped with heavy fines and indictments. So that's a little anecdote to share with you. What I said earlier in real life is that the majority of this country doesn't believe that sports betting is gambling. And I would also believe that a lot of folks in the esports sector don't believe that it's gambling. That's fine, but it's not their decision. It's the decision of the regulators and the governors and legislators who define and decide what's gambling and what isn't. I mean, is lottery gambling? I don't know. Is betting on a horse gambling? I don't know. But each state has a different way of approaching that. What I think the challenges for this industry are regulatorily are the following: underage, addiction, health risks, virtual athletics, and the health risks associated with that, cybersecurity, geolocation, and AML. All of which, for the most part, is very similar to all the challenges that exchange wagering, casino poker, sports betting have gone through. The esports industry is, let's take the example of what happened in August. David and I just talked about this yesterday, down the road. One of my longest clients in online gaming, which is one of the largest largest, if not the largest in the globe, is Entain, formerly GBC. They just paid close to 70, just shy of 70 million US to buy Unicorn. And the founders of Unicorn, who were monsters and created it out of whole cloth in 2015, cashed in well and did a very good job at scaling the company. Entain in 2020 processed over $17 billion in bets, 24,000 employees in 20 different countries across the globe. I would say that that is exhibit A for the power of this industry, which Entain's board and analyzers believe could approach $20 billion by 2025, esports alone. God bless Raul Sood, Carl Flores, the founders of Unicorn, which created a monster in a good way company. But well, Bill and I talked about this many times for the last 8 or 9 years we've known each other. Much like when Sheldon Adelson was around and opposing every online gaming bill in the globe, or in the US, for his own principled reasons. We are one scandal away from this industry collapsing. So the good news is Nevada and New Jersey are working furiously to make sure that the house rules are good and that we're watching for age verification and that the AML issues are all sorted, all similar issues what the gaming industry goes through on a daily basis. So I'm very enthusiastic and excited about what's going on. I'm a little surprised at how slow some states have been to approach and legalize sports betting since the repeal of PASPA. But I think that esports is going to be on steroids in 2022.
It's an excellent bullish opinion, which we like. Bullish. A big esports industry is good for business for all of us. Glenn, I want to hear from you now. You are a university professor. You are dealing with these players and kind of, I guess, maybe the good term is incubating an esports program, and these players are quite good, and I would imagine you have exposure to the real athletes, if you will. So I wanted to get your perspective on kind of the issues around betting as it relates to being a player, being underage, et cetera.
Yeah. Thanks. Look, I want to say something at sort of a higher level here as we talk about this underage gambling thing. I was actually just looking on my phone for a couple of great quotes from this, but you can pull quotes from the turn of the century where everyone was talking about how books were going to destroy the youth of America and that open publishing was the end of everything. And then it was rock and roll, and rock and roll is going to, it's the devil's music and children everywhere, about the children, and then it was television, right? And this is a pattern through history that as these new media come out, the first wave of concern is couched in the youth of America, because who wouldn't want the youth to be protected, right? It's an unassailable argument, but I think it's ultimately a false one, right? I think it. I don't think that there is a ton of evidence that this is any more a problem than it is with any other traditional sport or any other betting context. In fact, the study that the last speaker quoted about 25% of British youth doing underage gambling, that's not what that study said. That study said 25% of British youth tweeted about underage gambling. There still isn't a lot of evidence about that, right? So it's not to say this isn't important, and we don't think about it, we don't talk about it, because, particularly in the collegiate context, we're so used to the model that people go to college and then they go pro, and in esports, it's the other way around. They go pro and then they go to college. We've got people on our team that are pro players who retired and are now getting their college degree because you age out fairly young in this space, right? And so there's no doubt that the population playing these games skews young, and there's a logical inference there that it's an issue, but I'm still not convinced it's any more an issue than sort of comparable issues in other sorts of contexts.
Sure. And for context, I heard that the prime age for an esports player is like between 14 and 18 or 19. Is that
18 or
correct?
19. Yeah.
Very
So
young.
reaction time starts to go down. At least, and this is another interesting conversation I don't think we've quite had here, but there are esports that are reaction time based esports, and then there's turn-based esports, which are not, right? So there's almost two different paths there when we talk about the kinds of players and what they're going to do.
Okay, Jeff, now let's go to you because you work for Esports Entertainment Group, and Esports Entertainment Group is in the process of pursuing a license in New Jersey. Can you tell us a little bit about how that process has been? You come at it from a esports facing company versus the other companies in New Jersey, which are either doing iGaming or sports betting or both. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience with regulators.
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite the process in New Jersey. We're hopefully in the ninth inning with it. As the regulators on the panel here know, that is an arduous process. It's directors, officers to give all their background information, bank account statements. But there's a reason for that. That's so there is compliance, so everything is dotted and crossed. And I think one of the themes that's come up on the last couple panels that I've watched and been on is the need for that. We talk about a lot of these problems with underage players betting. A lot of that is fixed by regulation. I would imagine that a lot of the things in that study, which maybe even was debunked, but those players were probably betting on unregulated sites because someone who has a license is not going to risk that by accepting underage bets. And I think the esports industry can just look to the sports betting industry and what they've done in terms of getting rid of underage betting. Because I'm willing to guarantee there are more people in the US that are underage that are looking to bet on traditional sports than are looking to bet on esports. And that's not a knock on esports, it's just a smaller industry currently than traditional sports. So I think maybe the industry does itself a little bit of a disservice, and maybe it's a factor of the fact that I do think there's still this education gap where when people who aren't familiar with the industry look at esports, they say, oh, those are like the 15-year-old kids playing in their parents' basement. They don't really appreciate that. It's not. It's 35-year-olds. It's people who are adults that are doing this, and this is their passion and their hobby. Because I don't see a lot, and maybe this happened back in the day, and it does happen for traditional sports betting companies, but I don't necessarily see the hysteria around asking DraftKings, like, what are you doing to make sure a 15-year-old isn't betting on the New York Jets? Which obviously they are doing a lot to prevent that, but I don't see that question being asked as pejoratively as it is with esports.
Understood. Okay, next topic. I want to kind of discuss, we discussed on the phone, we were preparing for this panel about how the US is kind of light years behind Europe, right? Europe does have by all accounts, there is a significant esports betting market in Europe. There's also a lot of betting on young athletes, right? Tennis players and things of that nature. And I want to get a sense from our panelists, what are the differences in Europe that they have exploited so well, and maybe you can cite some anecdotes about things that have not gone so well, and what we can learn from that market as we continue down this path in the U.S. So we'll start with you, Bill Pasquale, and then go down to William Coley.
Well, first of all, the fact that you have a Malta-based headquartered company, EEG, and Jeff being here, partnered with a pretty strong brick and mortar casino organization, Bally's, I think speaks volumes. What Jeff and his team did, I think, was bold. They're going to be first up and running, and I think they're going to do extraordinarily well. I know that the team that Jeff is working with have been instrumental in getting Governor Murphy to put the Esports Institute in, funded by the UDA. But all that aside, it's going to take, just like in online, a tremendous amount of help, from predominantly European and Israeli content providers and gamers to bring us into the 21st century in esports in this country. A lot of lessons to be learned. But my frustration with where a lot of thoughts are with politicians, elected officials, when it comes to esports, is this obsession about age. Every single major league professional sport in America has underage juveniles playing in it professionally. We also bet on collegiate sports every day in this country. Why is it being looked at a little differently? So I believe the magic, and I think others on the panel can talk about the European experiences anecdotally, but I believe the magic that we need to sort through is similarly what we went through with online gaming coming here, is that content providers and the big folks that are doing this throughout the globe legally need to come in and press upon legislators. The only way to preclude, prevent, and avoid a proliferation of underage gambling and affecting the depraved and the vulnerable is to regulate it. It's the only way to do it. People are betting across America. I don't know what the numbers are on Bovado every day on these sports. And you know, the regulators don't care about that, or legislators don't. They'll continue to push back on the silly argument about age, which we can get into a little bit more. But what I'm most thrilled about is pivoting that conversation to a more responsible conversation about responsible gaming, which I believe the term is inappropriate. I think it's sustainable gaming. The only way for the gaming industry to continue to proliferate and excel and do well, and esports coming into it, is through watching and being mindful about RG, but calling it sustainable. We're not just telling you to do it because it's the right thing to do, like mom and dad used to tell us. We're telling you to do it because it's a commercially viable thing to do. The other thing, and Bill, I'll let you go, that I'm furious about, much like any other industry, many of which I work in, alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, you know, why does the government have to tell us what's good and bad? That I believe, and I'm a Democrat, Bill's a Republican, but I believe, and I'm a pretty progressive Democrat, parents need to take responsibility over the kids and sort them out from doing what's right and wrong, so we don't get into what we're going through with the Chinese government limiting how much time a kid can be on a video game. It's insanity.
Well, Bill, thanks. You know, it's funny. Legislators, there was a line in a Steve Martin song years ago talking about criticize things you don't know about. And you know, legislators are great at that because they don't spend a lot, they don't get a chance to, in a lot of cases, understand what they're regulating. And I can just tell you from getting to work with Glenn and Adam and a lot of the other founding faculty fellows at the Institute, this is another world. This, you know, I mean, it's kind of like the personification of the John Lennon song, Imagine It, you know. What if we had a world like that? That's what these publishers are creating. They're creating a world that people can spend hours upon hours in. That's a different world than the world surrounding us. And to go in and say, okay, League of Legends is just like rugby, or it's just, it's not. And you have to have some kind of grasp on that if you're going to step into that regulation. The European issues, yeah, I don't know that they've gotten it right. Lord knows they haven't gotten it right on some traditional sports betting things, and there's been a heck of a lot of blowback in Europe over getting things wrong, and they're wrestling with those problems right now. So I think, you know, a lot of times I look at regulation and I don't hold out a lot of optimism for regulators getting it right, because the standard move of a regulator is to say, okay, what are, if you lay out the perfect solution to them, the first thing I'll say to you is, what are other states doing? I can say that from experience, because it happened to me a lot of times in my career as a legislator. They want to compare to other states and just do what has already been done. And you can't really do that in the esports world. And, maybe the best thing is to let the industry come up with its own regulations and turn them over to the wolves if they don't. And by that, I mean, just look, there's liability for these companies, as Bill described what happens if you were running an online poker and all of a sudden, people look at this and say, hey, that's gambling. Well, the consideration, chance, and prize are there for all these things. And, you get an aggressive class action law attorney steps in here, you're going to have the industry demanding good regulation, and they'll set up their own systems to handle these problems. And I think maybe that's the best solution, because I think us trying to do it by comparing to other things, I don't think is what really goes on, and it is from people who don't understand the ecosystem that they're stepping into.
Glenn, just a specific question for you. The NCAA, right, for many, many years, probably 2 decades, they've been blasted for not allowing the athletes to make money off their likeness, and that has since been repealed. So does that progression have an impact on esports? What does it mean for esports? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, at the collegiate level, it most certainly does. I sat in with our university attorney the day after that ruling with our coaches to talk a little bit about it. I think one of the nice things about esports, as was mentioned, I think on an earlier panel, is they've already been doing this, right? That we've got a well-worn path where individuals in the esports world have built their own brand, they've built their own marketing channels, and are far more savvy about what that looks like than I think other collegiate athletes, which are going to be brand new to all of this world, right? So I think at the collegiate level, certainly esports athletes are going to be advantaged by their ability to make some money off of that. I also want to answer a bit of this last conversation too, because I think there's a really, I know it's not the question you asked, so it's not jacking this, but I think a massive risk to the industry is an uneven playing field. That no sport will succeed, no sport will be sustainable, to use your language, right? If it's not a level playing field, because some people don't want to play, right? So something has to be done to level that out so that competition is perceived to be fair to the extent that it can be fair in this space. And there's all sorts of both technical and regulatory aspects of making a level playing field. And I think until we can make a level playing field in esports, it runs a significant risk of burying itself by just not being fair, I guess, in the sense of a level playing field.
Can I just chime in real quick? So
Sure.
this is something I was thinking about when you guys, the bills were answering. Something that comes up a ton in esports, but not necessarily as much when you're talking about esports betting, is the power of the publishers and kind of the responsibility of the publishers. And I think because a lot of people in esports betting maybe look to traditional sports betting as like an allegory, we don't necessarily think about the publishers a ton. Publishers clearly have a ton of power, a ton of responsibility in esports. They make the games, they run the servers. I think a lot of what was just mentioned, leveling the playing field, some of that is on the publishers. The publishers own the league. It would be as if the NFL literally invented football, owned football, was the only place you could play football, and built the league and all the infrastructure, owned the stadiums, literally everything. So I think when we're talking about esports betting, there is going to be some sort of role that the publishers are going to have to play with regulators, creating that level playing field, creating those integrity procedures, making sure, because one of the things I know when dealing with legislators, there's a big problem in terms of like, who is the governing body here? Like there is no, with the NFL, the NFL runs the league. Say MLB runs the league. With esports, it's much more disparate where, there could be 25 or 50 different leagues that people could bet on. I know soccer in Europe is a little bit like that, but I think there needs to be kind of more of a governing body. And right now, a lot of the publishers, they make so much money on loot boxes and kind of what they're doing in game that for them, esports really, up until recently, and arguably even still, has been viewed as a marketing item for them. They don't really look, most of them don't look to monetize esports. So when they hear betting, they hear a four-letter word. A lot of them, up until very recently, and some of them famously more than others, completely run away from betting entirely. So I think as if we really want to be viewed by legislators as just another sport, I think the publishers are going to have to play a big responsibility there in kind of ensuring that all of that is copacetic.
But I think it's even worse than for them than you just described, because the publishers and the casino industry and the gaming industry in general understands how to deal with the legislators. How do you deal with the class action plaintiff's attorney? Because you own your NFL analogy was terrific. You invented the game, and everybody has to play on a field that they pay you to rent and all that. And you have this tournament that generates tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues, and then it's found out that some plaintiff's attorney finds out that some hidden secret in your code that one or two players may have known about. He brings an action and he puts it, the worst. I was talk about buying a ticket to the litigation lottery. I mean, the ticket to the litigation lottery it's a question of fact for the jury to decide whether it was unfair for these people to have been gambling in something that somebody else knew about the secret backdoor into the game, and someone else won, and it wasn't to publish then. I mean, when the first lawsuit like that happens, as Bill described, the Black Friday kind of thing. I mean, I guarantee you the publishers are going to be in there, and they're going to be talking with my friend Kevin Mullally and all the great folks at GLI and all the other fine gaming labs and institutes that can show that, hey, look, our game's fair, it's been tested, and they're going to want plausible deniability if there's something in that code. So it's an interesting thing that we're talking about here. It's very important.
Couple of weeks or months, I'm curious from a business perspective. Number one, where are you going to look to make book in New Jersey for esports and the various titles? And I'm curious what you think the competitive environment is going to be like once the regulations pass, or all the the DraftKings and the FanDuels. Do you think you're going to be competing with them for this niche marketplace?
Well, so New Jersey still has kind of the process, and Dr. Mintos in the last panel talked about this a little bit. The way it works in New Jersey is that every single event you have to get approval for in order to take bets on. I think that process, and the DG has been working with us and others, the message of them just being cautious around esports. It would be like, for example, you could bet on college football, but only the SEC, and then if you wanted to take bets on the Big Ten, it would be like, well, you got to get that approved in advance. It's just not necessarily what I think is a clean process. So one of the things that we've tried to do is work with them and the Esports Integrity Commission to kind of create a whitelist. We're not trying to take bets on some crazy, Latin American third-rate league where there probably are integrity issues, but there are a solid 20, leagues run by very reputable publishers where, they work with companies like Sport Radar to do integrity. So we're hoping to whitelist, a bunch of events so we don't necessarily have to kind of have that process, which I think is the right way to go about it. And a lot of other states are kind of looking at it that way as well. In terms of the competitive landscape, right now the bigger operators largely look at esports betting kind of as a line extension. So I don't think they're going to be putting in a ton of marketing to find sort of esports first bettors, which is really where I think we can kind of create a niche. They're going to have a good enough product where if you're someone who's a traditional sports fan and you're already on their platform and you want to just place one or two bets on esports, you'll be able to do it there. But if you're an esports first bettor and this is your passion and you're looking for kind of a tailored experience to what you're passionate about, I think that's where kind of our platform and our marketing can be pretty effective. And everyone in this room probably has heard a million times. I feel like in esports conferences, this word comes up all the time. It's authenticity. So I think having an authentic brand and marketing to gamers is important. Where I think some of the bigger operators aren't necessarily going to be able to fit that or thread that needle, I guess, in the early days.
At this time, I want to pan the audience, see if you have any questions for the panel. We're a little bit over halfway through, but did want to see if anyone has any questions. Go ahead.
Being that we heard about, how much regulators are, well, necessary in the ass, what are your thoughts on what happened in Nevada when they tried to put together the gaming esports commission on publishers push back and didn't really want to see that through?
Probably better for the regulators, but I'll just say quickly, I mean, that's pretty much exactly what I mentioned before, where they have, if this is going to really get big, they're going to need to be involved. I think right now, to them, it's more of a hassle than a moneymaker. Eventually, that will flip, and they'll have to / want to be involved, but I definitely want to hear what the legislators and regulators folks think.
Yeah, you have thousands of legislators around the country who all think that they're the most important person on the planet. So, and their state is the pivotal state on this issue. So I don't think, look, I've met enough casino control directors that, they know that there's unique things about their state and they have to design policy that is right for their state. And they're, and you have to worry about the civil legal system in each state that you allow this to go on. And so I think it's a great thing to foster a multi-state compact through an organization like NCLG's, the National Council of Legislation Gaming States, and kind of forge something like that, because I think that's the only way it's going to happen. Because publishers are going to need liability protection, and the states are going to want to have a say on the unique things that they believe are unique to their state. So it's a difficult needle to thread.
If I may, David, thank you for the question. Jeff, just to clarify, because I don't want anybody, certain people who know me that are watching online, I'm not a regulator.
You don't talk like a regulator.
I'm a lawyer. Well, I talk like a regulator because I'm going to answer this question, because the regulators are our friends. Period. I'm a lawyer lobbyist that got PASPA overturned through efforts of Governor Christie and Dennis Drazen, who got the first online gaming bill done in the nation, and have done it in a host of other states. Just got fixed odds done on horse racing in New Jersey. We're going to be doing it in Ohio, Colorado, and Oregon. So I'm the furthest thing from an official regulator. My dad happens to be a politician, a member of Congress for 30 years out of New Jersey on the House Ways and Means Committee. But your most valuable asset for any company, gambling, is your license. Period. I don't care what content you have, nothing's more important. Now people would argue with me, well, our content's more important, blah, blah, blah. Your license is the most important asset you have. What happened in the UK, we need to work vociferously and aggressively at avoiding here. Because the regulators and the operators went in different directions and went sideways. And listen, like anybody else, politicians, lawyers, gamers, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I think the better regulators, and I happen to think, and Bill has heard me say this multiple times, why what Jeff's company did is brilliant? Because New Jersey, not because I'm from New Jersey, because our headquarters is there, but New Jersey is the toughest regulatory regime in the world, period. New Jersey is now the third largest online gaming jurisdiction in the world, period. Third to the UK and Germany. And there's a reason for that. Any client that walks in my office, or I do a Zoom with, and this is important, This is free for you guys. I tell them, you want to come to America? You want to get licensed? Go to New Jersey and get licensed, because everything else will be easy. And it'll become serendipity. You use Jersey as the trampoline. The other thing that's important is what Jeff has had to endure with his executives. Anybody who's a 5% shareholder, a senior exec, they don't want to hear it. I got to fill out this personal disclosure statement. But I'm like, I'm worth $2 billion. Who cares? The regulators don't care. So, and I appreciate the question. I'm not trying to push back, but the regulatory environment is so critical to the success of all the other industries we talked about, but it's even more important to the success of esports. Because if the regulators collaborate with folks like you in the business, you'll have less mistakes, a more seamless process, and more profitability.
Excellent question. Do we have any other questions before we continue?
Thank you for the question.
Doesn't look
We'll line with you after this.
All right.
Okay.
You're fine.
Okay, the next topic I wanted to broach is, I heard, I think Monday morning, the first panel at G2E, one of the panelists said, sports betting is about sports and iGaming is about gambling. So the question I have for this panel is, what is esports about? Is it about esports? Is it about gambling? Looking at sports betting, that is an industry that is now legal and active in 20 plus states. And it's just going to continue. Ohio is not one of those states, so I will want to hear from you, Senator, about what's going on there. But I'm curious, what does that mean for esports legislation, and what do you guys think legislators need to be educated about most when it comes to legislating esports betting? And I'll just bring up, there was one issue a couple years ago before PASPA was repealed. The NBA and MLB wanted an integrity fee, right? That was an issue.
And the NFL.
And they all wanted it, but that was an issue that, they didn't understand what they were asking for. The operators.
Oh, yes, they did. They understood what they were asking.
It was a crazy ask, and there was this educational process that needed to take place. So I'm wondering, what are those issues, or are there any hot button issues for esports and kind of legislative education? And Jeff, I think we'll start with you and go to the right on that.
Sorry, that was a long question.
Long question.
What was the first part?
The first part was just about, sports betting is about, sports, iGaming is about gambling. What is esports about?
That's an interesting question. I'm not even sure I follow the premise of it, but I guess his point is the way I'm looking at it is he's kind of arguing that sports betting is more entertainment. It's about sports versus iGaming. That's gambling. I think Bill talked about at the beginning. It's all gambling. So I don't even necessarily follow what I guess esports.
I think, let me just tell you, the premise was basically why has esports expansion happened across the U.S., whereas New Jersey legalized in 2013. You went 5 years with no new states for iGaming. Then Pennsylvania legalized in 18 and 19. We're seeing Michigan, West Virginia, but it's been very sporadic versus sports betting, which has been like a wildfire.
The way I always understood that, you guys could probably answer a little better than I, but it's kind of like the casino interest. It's a lot easier to argue that iGaming was taken away from casinos business versus sports betting, which sort of wasn't already around. So it's a lot easier to argue that that's adding to the casino's business versus taking away from it. And then you have jobs and stuff like that with land-based casinos. But I guess to answer your traditional question, I think esports betting definitely fits more on the sports betting side, where I view it as it's entertainment, and when done responsibly, and what we've talked about this whole time, regulated and safe, it can be a very fun, engaging way for people to share their passion for what is a really exciting medium of entertainment.
Yeah, and I evangelize quite a bit for esports in my role, and the first question always is this is a sport, right? And it's that conversation about, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is 100% a sport. Period. That is what it is. There are athletes. They are exceptionally gifted. There are the LeBron James of esports. It's not just like anyone who's got a PlayStation can jump on the stage. You know, there's coaching and all of these other things that are traditional traditional sports. But I think kind of like the way light is a wave or a particle, depending on what you want. The other thing though is it's nothing like this sport in a lot of ways, because the fan base is like an inverted pyramid from traditional sports, because everyone who's watching also plays, right? Like I watch football, I do not play football. But the people who watch esports play esports. And so it's a very different ecosystem than traditional sports. And on top of that, you know, the notion of celebrity and streaming and broadcasting and esports as a media venture is also really different, right? Imagine, again, to use the LeBron James analogy, like if you could watch LeBron James practice basketball and you could message him while he was doing it, and he could say something back to you. Because that's what we do in esports, right? You know, it's a 24/7 thing. It's not a Sunday night thing. It's not a Thursday night thing. And so, yes, it's a sport, but, you know, it is not like any other sport we have known.
And Glenn, it's a great point. And therefore, you know, the way to you know, and for the reference for integrity fund, I mean, I think the mob would call it the big, but you know, I didn't think it had anything to do with integrity, because when you look at what has to be done to ensure integrity, it requires a lot of information, and that kind of stuff is all available in the esports world, where it's much more difficult in the stick and ball. I think Adam always calls it the stick and ball world, and it's just, you know, the important thing I think publishers need, and I think they realize this, you know, we're sitting there and we're talking about the one of the ways that they can monetize their product is through wagering and gaming, you know, betting on the outcome of the product. And that's what you can do in the stick and ball world. That's what you have to do. You know, that's one of the fewer ways. But when you're dealing with a universe that you created, there's other ways to monetize what's going on there, and thus avoid what BP3 just pointed out. All the licensing and stuff. You know, why do they want to go through that when they could set up a thing that creates other ways for them to monetize their game other than wagering? Why do they want to go through the process of getting a license? And it's just, it's an interesting thing that legislators and regulators have to be cognizant of if they want to be able to step into this arena and make sure that they lay a fair groundwork that would prevent negative aspects of things that are going to go on.
I really love the question. I want to answer both questions. And Professor, I think I was a football player, I was a basketball player, a pretty damn good baseball player. But I think if you and I could play football, we would have played. We probably would have played. And I will tell you, I can't play a darn video game. But if I could and be competitive, I would like to try. I think it's very similar. And I think I crossed the Rubicon on esports. I told the story earlier when my dad laughed at me for watching poker on television. Like, what idiot would watch poker on television? And the thing was booming. And I said to my kids, what idiot would watch people play video games on television? And they laughed at me. I'll never forget the day the NFL, after we won PASPA on May, I went to the Supreme Court with Ted Olson, got Christie to hire, went to Senate President Sweeney's office with the NFL and all the big mobs. And Steve Sweeney had a great response to him, and I was nervous because I thought that they were going to cave. And God bless Christie, and I'm a yellow dog Democrat, and God bless him. On the verge of a presidential campaign to e-sport or online gaming and sports betting. I think he's a monster of politician and leader. Steve Sweeney, the Senate President of Jersey, said to the NFL, we'll look blank in your face. I'm going to give you exactly what you deserve, and I'm going to give you exactly what you gave us in this process. 0. You've argued on integrity for to oppose sports betting when it's been legal in Nevada for over 50 years, and you want an integrity fee out of it? I mean, it's like the ultimate in hypocrisy. I think that esports, like traditional sports, is sports. But we want to look at other options to grow the business and the industry and monetize it. And what's wrong with that? So people can gamble on it. And finally, I'll say, David, what I think is important, and I just had the privilege, Ari's known them for a while, to meet AEU, the Amateur Esports Union. And I didn't have a clue what they were, who they were, what they did. I'm amazed at their reach. But they're out there advocating and educating for the amateur player in esports so they can get a competitive college scholarship and pay for themselves. Never forget the first committee hearing in New Jersey. I don't know, Jeff, if you were there a couple of years ago. I said, there's 200 universities that give scholarships for esports. I was like, I felt like a moron. And I learned and I educated myself. But the trick to this is people like this, not me. It's so important that we leap into gaming and monetizing, which the industry deserves to do in an integral way that provides for integrity, compliance, and RG. And I think if we focus on those three verticals, this industry is going to eclipse the 25 billion they claim by 2025.
This is the passion that's gonna get it done here. Thank you, VP3. Thank you to all our panelists. We're out of time.
Thank you guys, thank you so much for coming in during this very trivial time. Thank you so much. So our next talk will be in about 15 minutes. It's Beyond Esports, focusing in on the brick and mortar casino and immersive experiences. This is going to be a good one. So hopefully everybody online and in the audience will join us. Thank you.
Bill, take care.
Hey, thanks, pal.
All right, take care. Bye, bye.
Upstairs on the roof. On the roof, you got it. Which you don't talk about the stairs, stick the ball. Yeah. Good job. Yeah, take it off. Very good job. Oh, yeah. I got a school. Senator? Yes. How are you, my friend? Good. No, and I think those discussions. I could say Aria. Anybody ever asked that, you know, I was, hey, look, go to this. Yeah, their choice. Yeah, their choice. Senator's gonna second. No. Next up, good to see you. Take care. Okay. Yeah, we're going, my staff is all my left, or my, this thing, iPad. Yes, I never go.
Thanks, I'll see you in the morning. All right. We have actually.
Pleasure. All's good? You going over to Chick-fil-A?
I'm not. Yeah. I missed the meeting this morning. I was on my orders.
Oh,
Yeah, they were like, you didn't take some tests that became mandatory. Yeah. Okay, right on. Yeah, yeah. Hey, I guess it lived in Taiwan for a year, but. Oh, right on. You know, and in German. Yeah. So now I'm part of the compliance team, so. Yeah. That's fun. But typically with like testing software, it requires like a tier rather when it's get through jurisdictions. Right. We go through and test it against all the requirements. Or certified.
Right, so they'll give you like new stuff or just as well, or?
Yeah, like modifications to existing stuff.
Yeah, so they'll come to you and say, hey, we have a new game, you know,
yeah, so here's our Super Panda fiber.
Yeah.
So like a list of test steps, and then it's a bunch of checkers. Yeah, and then at the end, stamp it.
Yeah. So you have like, how do they like, and then on like what's the requirements, and like that, but you guys have but all they do is take up and just like analyze it.
Yeah, so we've got, I don't know, a few hundred employees across different offices, but and so it's usually split up per supplier. So like, usually it's like IDT does a certain way, and Aristocrat different way. So most of it's like, okay, we got 10 people on our so mission libraries, their software, engineers will review the code, math analysis guys, also the sales
Yeah, I know that there's traditions that I've never actually like, there's a lot of people speak about like the process that I was either a girl or they'll be the creative. I don't know why. Yeah, I remember it was like not that long ago, some girl, like in the hospitality practicing, this sort of like slide or like digital. So like, literally like flew up and I heard speaking about do the same kind of process. How many features are there current entities out there that would do that for the boards or
there's not too many. Like we're the biggest, and then behind is like our big competitor. Depending on the jurisdiction, like in Europe, there's a handful more. Australia has a few other cool teams. I mean, but especially in America, you know, we work with everyone here. And then like the UI lab, that's the like specific stuff.
Yeah.
And then we just do like some part.
I want to mention so like I call so we get the clients so then you obviously say there's something very
So yeah, on the client side now, I guess technically all of that's could be considered compliance testing because it's like we run all these tests and check if they meet requirements. But then the compliance team is like any gray areas they either make decisions based on
as president, reach out to the regulators and say like, hey, here's some weird things. What do you want to do with this?
Right.
And then after that, it's a little more unique. Their little features have their own test lab. So it's like we don't say anything approved, so we certify here's a letter we test it. And it's up to
Got it. So, and that's crazy. So, yeah, so you guys aren't thinking of, we're thinking, you're just saying, that's the specialized requirements. If you take it, you do the rest for a compliance process.
Yeah, for some, it's like Indiana or Washington. So there's a handful.
Yeah.
And then like New Jersey, we don't do both. We used to do any testing for, I think that might change.
I think they're coming in digitally. I think they're gonna come in digitally. So, hi, Mark, how are you?
Hi.
I just have to take care of some AV problems.
Okay, no worries. I hear you. I don't see you though.
Okay, no, you probably won't see anybody. That's the issue.
Oh, okay.
It'll be more like a phone call.
All right.